Hello everybody and welcome to our virtual 67 Pall Mall. Later on today, our own Fede Mocchia will be talking with cult winemaker Marco de Grazzi of Tenuta del Terranere on Etna in Sicily. And after that, we'll be talking with Stephen Spurrier, who'll be discussing his friendship with the late, great Michael Broadbent, MW. Following that, Jane Anson will be talking with Chateau Palmer winemaker Thomas Deroux and tasting a vertical of 6 different Chateau Palmers. And then finally, if that wasn't enough for today, Eduardo Chadwick will be telling us about his creation of Senya with Robert Mondavi and tasting a selection of Senya wines. But now it's a great pleasure to welcome back Peter Gago, Chief Winemaker for Penfolds and custodian of the iconic Grange style. And now we're going to be tasting 6 vintages of Grange from the 2000s. So please chat away on the side, share with us what you're drinking and where you're drinking it from, and also share on social media with hashtag 67FromHome. As usual, we'll try and have 15 minutes at the end where you can ask Peter all your Grange questions. So a big welcome back to Peter. How are you today?
I'm really good and great to be back. Quite a bit transpired since our last chat, Ronan, and very much looking forward to trying these wines with you.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, what a pleasure to taste 6 Granges all together. That's a rare privilege.
Yeah, well, look, we chose these vintages too, Ronan, because they're all from the new millennium. And of course, we could have gone back 30, 40, 50 years, but the fragility of perhaps some of those older wines post-decant and shipping around, I thought there might be a little bit more rigor and a little bit more reliability with some of these more recent vintages.
Right.
Now, you've got to do the arithmetic. 2002 was 18 years ago.
Yeah, I know. But these wines are pretty timeless. I mean, I've had some older Granges, you know, from the 70s, and they still have that core of, you know, very deep blackcurranty fruit to them and that sort of licoricey and menthol characteristics. So it's can sometimes be very hard to spot the vintages of Grange blind, I think.
Indeed. In a few months, Ronan, we'll be releasing the new edition of our Rewards of Patience book, edition 8, would you believe?
Yeah.
And probably the star vintage of the tastings for edition 8 was the 1952 Grange.
Yeah.
It's stunning, not from a curio or rarity perspective. This wine looked absolutely terrific. And yeah, with, you know, time, they complex, they mellow, they go into the secondary and tertiary phases. But this evening we'll be looking at quite a bit of primary fruit, I suspect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Look, okay.
Oh, sorry?
Yeah. So, but how often do you get to taste that legendary 51? Do you ever get to taste it anymore?
Oh, look, the 51 was an experimental Grange. It was the first Grange created by Max Schubert, the creator, and was deemed to be an experimental release. It's only been in recent years that it's really, what shall we say, been included in the complete collection.
Okay.
It was the 52 that was the official first, but the 51's crept in now over time.
Okay. And do you ever, how do you find that? Is it just rare collectors that have bottles and hidden away in cellars that they've forgotten about, or?
Yeah, occasionally they come up at auction. But yeah, we have some in our museum, our Penfold Museum, but certainly the other wines of the 50s, I wouldn't say we'd pour them often, but they are poured on occasion.
Okay.
There was a great deal of looking ahead back in the day because these were wines that were known to keep. So I can thank previous winemakers and chief winemakers for their diligence in cellaring a lot of these old vintages.
Yeah. And you had that, and you did, there was the 53 that was a Cabernet Grange. Is that right?
Yeah, there was a 1953 regular Grange and also a 1953 Grange Cabernet.
Okay.
And the 53 Grange Cabernet was actually 100% Block 42, that ancient Cabernet vineyard at Kalimna. For obvious reasons, we never repeated calling it a Grange Cabernet because of confusion.
Yeah.
1963 bin 64 was 100% Block 42 as well, as was the original bin 707, the 1964. It was 100% Block 42.
Okay.
But only in 1996 that we finally called the wine Block 42 and then repeated it back in 2004. So this is a wine, when it is released as a single vineyard, it happens once in a blue moon, not too often at all. But it did happen in 53 and it was then called the 53 Grange Cabernet.
Okay. And so, and why was it never repeated in the 50s as a Grange?
Just purely, in terms of the Grange name, purely confusion. Which
Okay.
Grange? There's only one Grange.
Okay.
That's 55, and it's just Shiraz. But having said that, when we get to the 2004 Grange, it will be the second wine that contains 4% Cabernet. And the 4% Cabernet in that particular wine is all off Block 42 by coincidence.
Right.
So people who like Block 42 might like the 2004 Grange, and we'll be tasting it as our second wine.
Right. And then was there ever a temptation to call Yatana Grange, to have a red and a white Grange as a pair?
Yeah, many media referred to it in the early days as the White Grange, and we let them call it that. That sounded good, a ring to it. It is Yatana, and we tasted it, of course, with the must-haves in our last session together with 67 Palmer.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, so before we start tasting, I wonder if you can maybe tell us a little bit about actually what exactly inspired Max Schubert to do Grange. I mean, I know he went to France, but where did he visit, and the initial story? Because I heard that there was a lot of kind of critics were quite critical about Grange in the early days.
Well, look, yeah, I think back in the early days, it was a very misunderstood style. It was completely alien to the wines of the time, most of which, like Saint Henri today, were matured in Australia in very old, large vats, foudre.
Yeah.
This was a wine in new oak, 100% new oak. And I suspect that Max showed some of these earlier vintages to people a little bit too young. Like now we don't even release Grange for 4 or 5 years, you know, as up to 20 odd months in barrel, and then bottle maturation, and then it's released. And quite often we'll say, look, it's a little bit on the young side. I advise you to hold on to it for a while for some vintages. But I suspect Max was, in his exuberance and the energy of this incredible blend, he was showing it a bit too early.
Right.
So then family-owned company, after a few vintages, actually prohibited the continuation of this blend and its release.
Yeah.
And of course, we'll talk a little bit later in the presentation about the hidden Granges. But it was quite misunderstood. But the genesis of it, where did the idea come from? Many people think he made a trip to France to search out what was going on. He actually didn't. Back in the 1800s, we at Penfolds made many fortified wines. And Max in 1950 actually made a trip to Spain, to Jerez, to look at fortified production. And on the way back from that trip, he went back through France, back through Bordeaux. The Cruz family there were very good. He went to a few different chateaus, looked at a lot of wine being stored in smaller oak, and thought, well, if they can, we can. And the big question, of course, well, why didn't you dabble with Cabernet? In Australia back in the day, there wasn't that much Cabernet around, and there was quite a bit of Shiraz, or what we called back in the day Hermitage, and he made Grange Hermitage, Grange Shiraz, back in those early 50s.
What would you say the proportion?
A trial originally.
Okay. And what would you say the proportion of the kind of the port style fortified wines to the dry red wines were being made at that time?
Oh, look, it was as high as 80 to 90% fortified.
Right.
Pre the 1950s. Some people say around 80%. I think it was a bit higher. And of course, that's completely reversed over time.
Yeah.
And, you know, fortified wines have diminished. There are some brilliant fortified wines made in Australia still, not just of the port styles, but of course, sherry styles, Tokais, Muscats. But that was pretty much what was made back in the 1800s, because let's not forget where you are, and I'm, 12,000 miles from where you are, but we sent wines back to the mother country in the 1800s. All the Portuguese had to do was cross the channel. The Spanish just had to cross the channel. Yeah. We had to cross the ocean. So a lot of what we sent back was fortified.
Yeah.
And then, of course, over time that changed with the advent of refrigeration and other techniques.
Yeah.
So that was, the starting point for so many Australian wineries in the 1800s.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Look, should we have a look at some of those slides perhaps?
Yeah.
Into the 2002. Yeah. So the first slide that you can see on the screen, that's where I'm currently sitting. This is McGill, where Max Schubert created the first Grange and made it only 10 metres from where I'm sitting in the open fermenters here at McGill. And it was only in the 70s that a lot of it went to our Nuriupta winery, and a good portion of it there, most of it is now made at our Barossa Valley winery. But in the second slide, you will see the raw material. We're very lucky with Grange and in Australia. And as we look at these Shiraz vines in the third and the fourth slides, Ronan, you'll see in that fifth slide just how old the vines can be. This is a relatively young vine. It would be lucky to be 100 years old. So, you know, old vines aren't everything, but when you get the right old vine in the right vineyard and the right soil in the right year, you can do magical things. You know, those older vines naturally self-regulate, they have a lower yield, and they physiologically ripen earlier. So when conditions are tough, quite often, we don't talk about hang time with Shiraz. The greatest Shiraz off the old vines might be picked earlier.
Right.
And they come off vines such as that. So we're very lucky to have that repository of, well, very old vine material. But that's not the only prerequisite for what goes into Grange. And we will talk about what sort of grapes go into Grange once we've started tasting.
And those very, very old vines, what's the real magical thing that they give you? Is it very low yielding and just very concentrated fruit, or what is the real magic behind having the older vines?
Yeah, look, a lot will depend, and most will depend upon the site, the vineyard and the soils, obviously. But that coupled with the old vine material is, as you've mentioned, a lower yield. And there's just some otherness, really, that quite often you don't get off middle-aged vines. Younger vines, of course, it's a bit like playing tennis. Your first game back, having not played for ages, is usually a good one. Then games 2 to 20 are pretty ordinary. You know, younger vineyard, you can get a good first or second crop, and then you might not see anything good for the next 10 years.
Right.
But with old vine materials, you can get something magical almost every year. Not every year, but almost every year.
And a lot of the source material from grain, because a lot of Grange, so a lot of South Australia is kind of phylloxera free. And are a lot of the vineyards used for Grange, are they own rooted?
Very much so. Our isolation, both with COVID and with phylloxera, has been to our great advantage. We've never had phylloxera in South Australia, and touch wood, hopefully with our biosecurity measures, phylloxera won't hit our vineyards. So many of the vineyards, certainly the older vineyards, are very, very much own-rooted, but we ensure with a lot of rootstock in some vineyards of some varieties, but these ancient vineyards tend to be own-rooted.
Right, right.
Yeah, but look, if we look at slide 6, you'll see there that Grange is officially a heritage icon of South Australia, but we won't dwell on that. On slide 7, just before we start the tasting, this gives us a little bit of an overview and actually does indicate that, as you can see, no two Granges are the same. The sourcing changes year to year, although you can see every single one of those vintages we're tasting will be predominantly from the Barossa Valley. Now, that hasn't always been the case. You'll see some of those vintages contain McGill Estate Shiraz still, but not all of them. Some have a bit of McLaren Vale fruit in, some Clare Valley, some will have material from the Adelaide Hills, some Coonawarra. Now, the question is, well, why that huge variation in sourcing? And that's really because, well, this thing called Grange, all we're trying to do is put together a blend that represents the best Shiraz we can make in a given year to the stylistic template, the house style of what we call Grange.
Yeah.
We don't care where it comes from, just as long as it's the best that we can get to befit that style, the house style of Grange. So it's almost like a champagne model. It's a blend. It's the best blend we can put together synergistically. And how do we get that house style when we have so much to play with? Well, when we do our tastings after harvest, those tastings are completed organoleptically blind. We don't know the vineyard, we don't know volume, and we don't even know variety. Everything is done purely from bottles with codes, and you cannot cheat. It's all done blind.
Right.
Now, I'm not saying that this is the way to make or blend red wine, but it's a very successful technique we've used at Penfolds for Grange for now over 60 years. And it gives us this pretty much narrow thing called Grange. No two are the same, but they don't bounce off walls, these styles. And the only thing that keeps you honest is this blind tasting. It keeps the emotional biases out of the selection, and it keeps very much the financial biases out of the selection.
Yeah.
Financial biases, what would they? Well, you know, we'd prefer all the fruit for Grange come off our own Penfold vineyards.
Yeah.
But that really happens. We have a great number of growers going back generations. In fact, the Gersh vineyard this year in March, that particular family brought in their 100th consecutive load of grapes to Penfolds across 100 vintages into the New Riopta winery.
Yeah.
But we say Gersh must go into this. If it's not good enough, it doesn't go in because we don't know which is which. It would suit us to put McGill Estate Shiraz into the wine every year, but we don't know. There might be 40, 50, 100 samples, all of which are coded.
Right.
So volumes of Grange vary year to year because of that selection technique. And also, as you can see on the slide, the percentage of Cabernet varies. It doesn't show it there. That range is only from 1.5 to 4% of the wines we're tasting this evening. Oh, sorry, your lunch. But in a year like, for example, 1993, there was 14% Cabernet, the highest ever.
Right.
So don't dial up 2% or 4% or 1.5%. It's literally what comes out in the wash. When all is revealed and we find out what has actually been selected, that's when we do on the calculator, we add up what's in the barrels and those sorts of figures come up onto the screen. But it's not preordained.
Yeah, and we've kind of talked about this before, but you know, you see yourself very much as the ambassador for the style of Grange, and you'll keep it the way it's always been until the day that you decide that you're going to retire or whatever, and then the next winemaker will come in. But so there's been a succession of great winemakers, chief winemakers at Penfolds, people like John Duval. And has that philosophy just been passed down automatically, or has anyone thought maybe we'll reduce the amount of oak to it, or maybe we'll change it slightly, or is it just we want to keep Grange as it is?
Look, it's a funny one, Ronan. Like, at Penfolds, we don't really refer to it. We're part of a larger group, but Penfolds now has been going for 176 years. And it's not so much a brand as it is a culture. And within that culture, there's, people working through the ranks and mentorship going on. And we've been endowed with longevity of the winemakers, not only chief winemakers, and we've only ever had 4, I'm the 4th, but senior winemakers. Steve Leonard just recently retired after 39 vintages. John Bird started here at McGill Estate in 1960 and only relatively recently retired. Andrew Baldwin has just completed 35 vintages with our group. Kim Schroeder, 30 odd vintages.
Right.
You can't buy that sort of thing. We're so lucky. But no, there's a natural order to it. Again, like the percentage of Cabernet, you don't dial up the longevity of your winemakers. We're very lucky. We're endowed to have, so lucky to have that sort of loyalty to what is a publicly traded company nowadays. The family-owned company, well, they sold out back in the 70s. So we're very lucky. But look, just getting back, though, to the philosophy of Grange, if we only made Grange, and this is a blend, it defies all the terroir sort of things or whatever, although each vineyard that goes into it brings its own contribution of its own terroir into the blend. But at Penfolds, and we made mention of this in our last session with Richard Hemming for the Penfold must-haves, we do make the single vineyard wines, respecting sense of place and certain sites. We do make wines from single regions, But this, the Grange style, is very much something that is hugely successful and is a different offering. So we're not saying necessarily this is the way to make red wine. It's the way we make Grange.
No.
And the marketplace really has determined what has happened over the years. And really, not even it's what's in the glass. And we'll talk about that in a moment. Yeah.
So could you equate it maybe to a bit like Moët and Chandon, how they make Dom Perignon? You know, they get the choice of all the best grapes that they can put, and they put that into Dom Perignon, but it's not a single vineyard. It's the best of a region, if you like, best of a.
Yeah, for us, it's the best of the best. There have been only a couple of vintages that have been exclusively Barossa Valley. You know, there's nothing to say either that Grange could be in a great year from a single vineyard. You know, if it were just so majestically complete to the style, there's nothing to preclude that. But what we found is that adding all those different colours, flavours, characters, we end up with something much grander for this style of wine.
Yeah.
And look, you know, you mentioned Moët and Chandon with Dom Perignon. You could use the Krug analogy. I noticed Olivia, you know, in the show. You know, he will make a Grand Cuvée with the team. They'll make a vintage expression. They'll make a Blanc de Blanc, single vineyard from Menis, a Blanc de Noir, single vineyard from Ambonnet. You can do all of that. You know, Krug was founded in the year prior to Penfolds, 1843. We came a few months after them. So this is, in effect, our house style of a completely different genre of wine, Shiraz, or what many people call Syrah, with just that little bit of Cabernet.
Yeah. Okay, well, should we move on and taste the first?
Yes, let's have a look. And if we put up slide 8, that will give those who are watching and viewing an appreciation of what's in that wine, and we'll beat them to the pass there in terms of their questions. That lovely slide, it almost looks like crystallography there, is the information on the 2002 Grange. It's a Milton Wardley picture of a Grange component fermentation. Look at the colour, that's after 2.5 days of fermentation. You'll see there, this wine contains 1.5% Cabernet. If you can pick that, you're doing better than I. I had to cheat and look at the sheet. You can't pick usually how much Cabernet. You've got to look at the numbers. I'll be totally honest there.
And I think I remember when I went to McGill, but I remember seeing the vats that were used for Grange, and they were all very big, open top fermenters with kind of wooden slats around the side. Is that?
Yes. Yep, they're the open fermenters, Ronan, at McGill, and their wax line. They vary in size from about 3 tonne to about 7 tonne. They are used for some fermentations, but most Grange is made at our New Riopta winery in 10-tonne static fermenters, modelled on the original open fermenters with wooden header boards. Now these static stainless steel fermenters have stainless steel header boards, but the technique of fermentation is exactly the same. Every day, once, sometimes twice a day, we rack and return. And by that I mean we drop the fermenter, the free run goes to a runoff tank, and then over the top, it's returned. And the header boards fall down to the bottom of the fermenter. Okay. So in other words, what's happening here is you've got that active exchange, this very oxidated mode of winemaking. You get the colour quite quickly. Obviously, you need small berries with thick skins of low yields, because this is a fairly aggressive way, not over extracting, but we make the wine very quickly. We make the wine in the fermenters. Well, it doesn't even finish fermenting in those fermenters, whether they be open fermenters at McGill or static fermenters at New Riopta. Roughly 3/4 to 4/5 of the way through the fermentation, the free run is let off to barrels, brand new American oak hogsheads, 300 litre barrels of Quercus alba American oak. And it continues fermenting in those barrels. The skins fall to the bottom of the fermenter, and they're sort of, you know, still fermenting in effect, because there's still a bit of juice in there as well. At McGill, into a basket press, and then straight to barrel. at Neuropter through a membrane press and then straight to barrel. Then usually we combine, but not always, the pressings with the free run. We top the barrels.
Okay.
Don't fill those barrels completely because the wine is still fermenting. We'd lose a lot of the volume of the barrel if we filled it at that stage.
Yeah.
And there's a slide, actually, your slide 10, we're going to skip a couple of slides here. See that is actually losing a little bit of wine out of the barrel. It's still fermenting within that American oak barrel. That actually looks worse than this. That's mainly froth. It's not that bad. That wouldn't be much at all. If that's 20 mil, it's 30 mil, but it doesn't look that good. But if you were to fill the barrel, you'd lose significantly more. So the fermentation is completed in that barrel off skins. Now, you might query that. Well, hang on, we get all the flavor, we get all the color from the skins and it's off skins. Well, again, this attests to the quality of the fruit, the grapes from which this wine is sourced. If they were just ordinary grapes, all you'd have at that point is a pseudo-rosé. Yeah. You know, it's very much a big, full-bodied wine that has to last decades. So you have to have the color and the flavor before that wine, almost wine, hits the barrel.
And what would you say the percentage of alcohol of the unfinished wine is when it goes into barrel?
When it goes in a barrel, it's probably sitting at around 10% or thereabouts only, 10, 11, sometimes 12. We don't say at exactly this point of time it will go in. You'll be tasting the wine a couple of times a day. And look, it's starting to show a little bit of extraction. Let's get it off, you know, or it needs a little bit more color, leave it for another few hours, you know, and basically this is why we don't make that much Grange. I'll talk about the volume in a few minutes, but you know, this is a very laborious way. The last thing you want to be dealing with at harvest with, you know, ferments everywhere and grapes coming in everywhere is having barrels to fill when you've got ferments everywhere. You know, it's something you usually do later. You fill from a tank of a dry fermenter or a runoff tank that's all nice and, you know, very gracefully fill the barrels. This is, you know, in the middle of a dynamic. This is, you know, not chaos, but could be. So you hedge your bets. Not every wine goes into a barrel on the off chance that'll make Grange. Yes, we end up with a lot more contenders because the selection isn't even finished at this process. The selection is finished later at classification. So at this point, we have this many wines. At the end of classification, we have that many wines left. And I mentioned volume of Grange in a given year. A lot of people would think, oh, you can just choose anything. You can make as much Grange as you would like, if only. You know, in some years, on average, we say 7,000 to 9,000 cases. That's 12 bottle cases, 9 litre equivalents. That's less than half the volume of the first growth. Yeah. That's for the world globally, less than half the volume of the first growth. So we're not talking big volumes here, but as we go through the process, we do more and more selection.
And so if it doesn't go into the classification stage, the selection stage, if it doesn't go into Grange, where does it go?
The great thing is, and this is the wonderful thing about working at Penfolds, what doesn't quite make the grade there will cascade down into baby Grange, bin 389. Or sometimes, if it's very, very early in ferment, it might go to RWT if it's from the Barossa. But we've got to get into French oak quickly for RWT, so it's got a better chance of making it into bin 389. If it's Marananga, it can go into bin 150 perhaps, if it's in American oak. Bin 150 Marananga Shiraz is matured in both French and American oak. So we've got this lovely cascading effect. And 389 benefits from what falls from above and is relegated from Grange. So the smart money Ronan quite often in a great year for Grange buys a lot more bin 389.
Right. I'll write that down.
All right. Yep. Well, we probably should, I'm just looking at the time, we probably should go through some of these wines.
Yeah.
Grange, the next one, Ronan, that's the one that contains 4% Cabernet, and that 4% Cabernet is block 42 in the 04 Grange, the next wine, the second wine.
And so, I mean, with the O2, first of all, what do you find? I mean, like we talked about earlier, it feels incredibly young. I mean, you would really not think that that is an 18-year-old wine, the 2002.
Not at all. If we look at the colour of the O2, or for that matter, even the colour of the O4, they don't change that much for the first 20, 25 years. But what will happen over time is they maintain freshness, but I love it when they get into that secondary, almost tertiary phase.
Yeah.
That might not happen for 25 or 30 years. But it is a wine that even the O2 and the the O4, which we've got on the slide with the barrel ferment, was a very, very dangerous wine. It was dangerous in that you couldn't keep your hands off it when it was released. I have so many friends who bought quite a bit of the O4 Grange and boom, it was gone in months. And I thought, hang on, it's meant to be kept for decades. But there's something so appealing in most instances about Grange in its earlier years. It's quite deceptive. A lot of people think, no, you've got to push it to one side. It can't be drunk so early. The great Granges can be drunk very, very early. Talking to John Bird and others, the 55 Grange, a legend, was a great wine to drink in its youth, and it's still a lovely drink in the year 2020. You know, they don't suddenly become great wines in year 43 or year 51. They start off like this and they just transform over time, but they are imminently drinkable as younger wines, albeit fresher, albeit with that vivacity of youth and those primary fruit characters.
Mm. And that the oak on that 2004 Grange is very well kind of integrated. Really, it doesn't smell that oaky at all. You get a little bit of that kind of toasted coconut flavor on the back of the palate, but really the oak is, 16 months in an 100% new American hogsheads, you would think that the oak has more of an impact.
Yep.
Very subtle.
Well, that's a common theme here, Ronan. Through all of these wines we're tasting, every barrel is new. It's easy to remember, 100% new oak. Do you know there were only ever 3 vintages of Grange that weren't matured in 100% new oak? The 57, the 58 and the 59. They were the 3 hidden Granges. When, as earlier mentioned, Max was forbidden from continuing to produce Grange by the then family-owned company. Now, he continued making the wine. He could hide the barrels. He bottled the wine. He could even hide the bottles. But he couldn't hide invoices for new oak. Accountants then, like accountants now. So in 57, he used 1-year-old oak from the 56. In 58, 2-year-old oak. And in 59, 3-year-old oak. So they are the only exceptions to not being 100% new oak for this thing we call Grange.
Yeah. Now,
some people would quite accurately and wisely advocate that a wine can't always handle 100% new oak. And I totally agree. If components and parcels contenders for Grange can't handle 100% new oak, in other words, if it's not absorbed, if it stands apart from the wine, then that wine is simply relegated, that parcel. It doesn't make it into the blend. So wines that finish their fermentation in oak get better integration of fruit and oak, just like a barrel fermented Chardonnay would. Yeah. But sometimes the oak is still too dominant, even at the time of almost blending. So those components are relegated. If the wine is over-extracted, if the oak pokes out, if it is not true to what it should be at that point of the making of the wine, it's not included. Yeah. So components that go into this have to be able to absorb and digest all of that new oak.
Yeah.
Style. We have other styles. Sononry, you know Sononry very well, Ronan. Yeah. No oak at all. Yeah. That's a different style of Shiraz made by Penfolds. Grange, though, must be able to handle new oak.
And Dominic is actually asking in the Q&A, how does Saint-Henri relate to Grange? He was previously told it's exactly the same fruit and winemaking, save Saint-Henri is entirely made of older barrels.
Almost. Saint-Henri, as a rule of thumb, but not exclusively to 100%, but almost, will finish its fermentation. It will go to dryness, and then it will go to the older, larger foudre, the larger format, ordinarily. So it doesn't get the barrel fermentation that Grange gets in new oak, firstly. Grange is picked at what we call an A1 grade level, the best of the best of the best. Sometimes St Henri will get a little bit of that, but its average sourcing component would be at an A2 Grange level, sorry, A2 Shiraz grade level. So the quality is just a little bit behind that of Grange. However, having said that, in a year like 1971, if you put the legendary 71 Grange alongside the 71 St Henri, it's an example I often use, many people put the St Henri 71 ahead of the legendary 71 Grange, which is quite a statement. In years to come, we'll be trying the 2010 Grange. If you've got any 10 St Henri at home, put it up against your 10 Grange. And there, I think it very much becomes a style preference rather than a quality preference.
Right.
There are exceptions, but on paper, Grange should be better because it chronically receives better quality fruit. But in a great year, the difference is almost non-existent.
Yeah.
From a sourcing perspective.
Yeah. And someone else is asking in the chat box, and this might be a difficult question to answer, but how long would you say ideally you would want to age Grange before you drink it? Is there an optimum window that you say, now for me, that's the best time? Is it 15 years, 25 years, 10 years? Or is that too difficult a question to generalize?
It's a hard one, and I don't mean to sound or give a political answer to this. But as we know, all wines rise to a quality peak, the lesser ones fall quickly. We've often explained that Grange will only ever hit a pure absolute quality peak. It won't go any higher in a given year. But the great wines, as we know, plateau for a long time. A great Grange will plateau for decades, but no matter how good it is, it will ultimately go into a decline phase. The trick is to drink it on the ascent or at some stage across the plateau. Don't do what most people do and try and second guess where it falls off the plateau. That point at which it falls off the plateau is often attributed to good or bad cellars, or quite often just the wine itself inherently. They don't go forever. For me, my own collection of Grange, and I collected Grange before I joined Penfolds when I could afford to buy the older Granges. I've still got many Granges from the 1950s, and there are 2 or 3 I'm in no hurry to drink. Whereas there are wines from the 60s, the 68, the 69, they should have been drunk 15, 20 years ago, ideally. They're still hanging in there, but they were a much better wine 15, 20 years back. But as a rule of thumb, really, it's hard to go on the journey with this wine because, a case gets expensive. We used to be able to go on the journey with wines when we could buy multiple cases. But almost even the lesser vintages of Grange will still give you effortlessly 3 decades.
Right. So Paul is saying he has indeed opened a half of 2010 St Henri, and it's fantastic. Unfortunately, the 2010 Grange to drink.
One of my favourite St Henris. That and the 16, actually. 71, 90, 2010 and 16 St Henri are my 4 favourite St Henris across the last half century.
Okay. That 2004 is fantastic.
Yeah.
What would you say?
The next slide, Ronan, the 2006. I'm just fearful of maybe running out of time. We can always come back to these others. You'll see there's Grange being racked and returned. Can you see over the top of the ferment, this wine is just spraying. You've got the froth there. It almost looks like fairy floss. This is a very gentle percolation over the top of the fermenter here at McGill. Now, using a positive displacement pump, a mono pump, you can almost use it like a fire hydrant very aggressively if you've got very tough skins in a very sort of different year. You can do it very gently or you can do it very aggressively. And this is where the winemaking comes in. It's not just a rack and return, it's how you rack and return. And that's where you need a bit of a feel for the quality of the fruit. And fortunately, in our red wine team, we have red wine specialists who are very used to, wind it back or go in as hard as you can or more air or do it very slow. slowly and gently. So there is no formula here. There's a little bit of gut feel involved in how you manipulate the skins and the cap. Yeah.
So it's kind of like a submerged cap and then a rack and return, but how often?
Over the top.
Yeah. How often do you do the rack and return process during the ferment?
Usually with material that you know is definitely Grange, twice a day.
Okay.
Morning and then later in the day.
And how long will the ferment be for? 2 weeks, 3 weeks?
Look, you can get through ferments as quickly as 4 to 5 days. In some years, depends when things cool down. If the Shiraz comes in later in the season, it might take an extra day or two. Remember, there is no time on skins. So it's not like with some Cabernets for some wines of some wineries. This has 0 time on skins. It has negative time on skins. So it comes off skins when you feel that everything is in that component. Yeah.
Great. So and Dave is also asking, what does the Cabernet bring to the blend?
It's an interesting thing. I think when you select the Cabernet that goes into the blend, and let's not forget, as mentioned earlier, the classification tasting, you don't know one glass from the next. You don't go to the glass and think Cabernet, you go to the glass and think Grange. So it's almost indistinguishable, which sounds a little bit counterintuitive because you're really not selecting Shiraz, you're really not selecting Cabernet, you're selecting potential Grange material. Muscular, you know, full of all of the plummy characters, the soy, the hoisin, the licorice, the blackness. But it's not just blackness. It's not just plummy. It's not just, it's this otherness, this thing that you have to extrapolate to become this 14 years later. So you're not picking Cabernet, but what does the Cabernet add later? I think structurally and in a flavour sense, the Cabernet does bounce back in the blend. And, you know, we can't unscramble the eggs, so we can't sort of take it out later and analyse what it's done. But in its selection, it's selected because it's Grange-like, not because it's Cabernet-like.
Okay. And I noticed this has Coonawarra, so presumably that's where your Cabernet is from.
Yep, in 2006. Yep. Not to forget, in Coonawarra too, we have a wonderful old block of Shiraz, Block 5 Shiraz. So Coonawarra, yes, Terra Rossa soils, wonderful Cabernet, but let's not forget its propensity to produce good Shiraz as well. You know, if you look at Wynn's 1955, Michael, one of the wines ever made in Australia, 100% Syrah out of Coonawarra.
Right.
Wynn's Michael, 1955.
And for those 3 vintages, so how long you've been? 25 years as chief winemaker, is that right? Is that about correct?
Sorry, I missed that. Sorry, Ron.
You've been, how many years have you been chief winemaker at now?
Not that long, 18. I've been with That's now my 31st year. And in this role, John left in 2002, early in 2002. So if I've done the arithmetic, 18 going on 19 years in this role.
Okay. So 2002, you could say, was your first vintage?
Yeah, with the team, you know, but the thing being, this is a complete team effort. Grange, Sononry, all Penfold wines, you know, there's been a lot of pressure over the years, you know, sign back labels and that. No. This Penfolds, it's about team culture. It is about the collective. We don't make one by committee though, by the way, but all the people through from cellar hands, winemakers, viticulturalists, that's what's Penfolds. Yeah. You know, visiting you in London, I can do that because someone's doing a bit of the hard graft back in the Barossa Valley. You know, I can't stress that enough. You know, when you're a smaller winery, 1 or 2 person show, fine. With us, we make a lot of wine and it's very much the team.
Yeah. Well, it's very much the same at 67 Pall Mall. We have a big team of sommeliers and back of house people, and you know, and it's exactly the same as that. So,
yes. Look, I've just poured the 2008, but before going to the slide, if you look at slide 12 there, the next slide, Ronan, you'll see some of the different soil types from which Shiraz grapes are sourced in the Barossa. Now, this is only the Barossa. You couldn't get more different soil types in a very, very small region. Now add to this the different soils of the Clare Valley, of different vineyards across McLaren Vale, Coonawarra, as earlier mentioned. You know, this is what gives us the different characters, the different flavors, the different Syrah and Cabernet components that go in this potpourri of flavor and character and structure. There's so much that we can get in the way of components to give us that synergistic blending potential. I just thought I'd show that before going on. I'm not too sure how the colors have come across at 12,000 miles on a screen, but you can at least see there that they're different. You can see limestone, you can see yellow speckled clay, you can see a bit of sandy loam, many, many different soils that go into the Syrah vineyards.
Yeah.
But if you look at the 2008 slide, which actually is a photograph, it'll come up in a moment. It's a photograph of a barrel ferment. That's the opening of a barrel. And you're looking into it. And Milton Wardley, the photographer, said, oh no, that can't be photographed. We'd never be able to get that. He's captured, that's a little bit of the 2012 Grange finishing its ferment in the barrel, looking through the opening of the barrel. But against that, you'll see that this wine contains 2% Cabernet. You'll see that it contains McGill Estate Shiraz as well. Now, 2008 ended up being very, very highly accoladed around the world. There were many 100-point scores for this wine. Yet on paper, that should never have happened. It started off probably being 2008, a 9.5 out of 10 harvest, up until the first week of March. On the 3rd of March, a heat wave started that went for, many people say 15 days. I think it was closer to 16 days. Every day was above 35 degrees. 12 of the days were above 38. And it didn't really much cool down at nights. So we were so lucky again to have old vine material that phenologically ripened earlier that we're able to pick before the full wrath of that heat wave hit, because it was very much a vintage of two halves. Right. Something 97% of all the Barossa material included was picked before, luckily, March the 3rd. Now, journalists said to me at the time, oh, of course it was, Peter. Yeah, of course you picked before. No one forecast the heat wave. No one knew there was a heat wave coming. We were just very fortuitous in that we picked a lot of the great material before any heat started in 2008. So watch your 2008s and when they were picked, where they were picked. You can get a great wine or you can get something that's a little bit porty and a little bit that's heat affected. But time will tell what happens to this 2008 Grange. I'd feel very good about it because, yeah, we know when it was picked. 2008.
And so Nigel is asking in the chat box, has it always been American oak or were the earlier vintages with French oak?
Always American. Day one, without exception. The only exceptions with 100% new American oak has been 57, 58 and 59 with the 1, 2 and 3-year-old. But always American. Yeah. We've filed Grange with French, of course we have. RWT with the 1997 vintage came about because we got sick of saying to people, oh look, we love Barossa Shiraz. We love it in French oak, but this is altogether different. This is Grange. Now, it's not broken. We still now have RWT as a contemporary alternative of Barossa Shiraz matured in French oak. You have your cake, you eat it too, but without compromising the style of this.
And was there a reason that American oak was chosen over French in the early days?
I think just its availability.
Okay.
Yeah, we're able to access that. You know, probably now at Penfolds we'd use as much French oak across all wines as we would American oak. Wines like RWT are all in French oak. Bin 169 Cabernet, all French oak. Bin 407, half French, half American. McGill Estate Shiraz, 2/3 French, 1/3 American. But wines like this in 707, 100% American oak. For that style. Not saying that's the only way to do it, but for this style. See, we slavishly adhere to those styles. not to those formula. There is no formula, to stylistic templates.
Yeah.
Why people return to this. They know what they're getting, not in a consistency way, because that's boring. No two Granges are the same. Bin 389 is 100% Quercus alba American oak. People know that style, trust that style, follow that style, and they cellar that style.
And Miriam is asking about the fact is that they seem to spend different times in oak. And is that really just done on taste? When you think it's got enough oak, you remove it from the oak?
That's a great question, you know, because many people don't even think of that. A lot of wineries used to, not so many nowadays, but a few still do, they bottle according to the calendar. Oh, it's, you know, whatever, time for bottling. For months prior to bottling, we have what we call monthly maturation tastings. And we might bring bottling forward by a month or 2 or 3, or delay it by a month or 2 or 3. It's done purely by taste.
Okay.
Yeah. We don't want certain characters to go too far in oak. We don't want to leach out too much of certain characters. Yeah. We want to maintain freshness. You know, some people are obsessed as to when to pick grapes, and understandably so, to the day, almost to the afternoon, to the hour. I think bottling is not quite as important as that, but almost. Too many people just do it by the calendar. Getting wine to bottle fresh, capturing what you want at that point of time is very, very important. Yeah. Bottling dates are extremely important. Yeah.
And so presumably you blend all the barrels together to homogenize it and then bottle straight from that.
Yeah, no, well, it's a little bit different again, Ronan. For this wine, I've got a good winemaking friend who uses the expression, no guts, no glory. We put the blend of Grange together, and this is a really good point, and thank you for that, mnemonic. The blend of Grange is put together literally almost at this time in June. We finished our classification tastings almost a fortnight ago, and I dare say the Grange blend will be physically put together over the next couple of weeks. So the blend synergistically matures as a blend in barrel, not in components and separate barrels.
Okay.
Penfold wines red that are kept as separate components are our Cellar Reserve Pinot Noir and our Cellar Reserve Grenache, both of which are quite fickle. They can go that way or they can go that way, and we keep an eye on them. And our Bin 138, Grenache, Shiraz, Mataro, because again of the Grenache, we don't know where it's going.
Okay. We
have a feel, but to ensure we keep the components separate. But for Grange, 707, 389, those styles, the blend goes together as quickly as we can physically put the blend together, and then it matures as a blend.
Okay.
Yeah. Ooh, 10. Everything I say about the 10, you've got to halve. I've got a bit of bias with 2010. I like the 10.
So where is this photograph? Is this taken at McGill or Nuriopta?
This is at McGill, yes. We've got a lovely, lovely barrel facility at our Nuriopta winery. Very modern, air conditioned, covers a very large area. But this is in cellar 2 at McGill. And you can see there the giveaway McGill signs of what we call wooden carrots, the wooden bungs that are sitting on top of those barrels. Now, that red wine spillage is not there aesthetically for show. That's where it's been spilling over with the barrel ferment. And we will deliberately slightly overfill the barrel before we put the wooden carrots back in, and then we seal them with paraffin wax.
Okay.
So that's at the McGill Winery, cellar 3, Quercus alba, American oak, 300-litre barrels. Yeah.
And that there's going through the remaining of its alcoholic fermentation, or its malolactic?
Looking at that, because they've been sealed, they will have finished primary ferment. We'll still wax them up like that quite often for Malo, but usually Malo's complete at that point. We'll put in little movable little things on almost stainless steel bolts so they can go up and down during the Malo, but all Malo is in the barrel. Yeah, completed in barrel.
And this tank here, this vat?
Rack after Malo.
this 22,000 litre vat, is that still used or not anymore?
No, that's back from the mid 1800s, that cellar, and that's where wines out of barrel would have been blended. They're huge cuboidal containers, all wax lined. We haven't used those well before my time, so you know, decades and decades they haven't been used. But it's lovely. You can open that door and put your hand in it, and it's like velvet. The lovely wax is, you can still feel that where they used to blend behind those. Yeah, well picked up. Yeah. 22,000. There you go.
So there you are with the paraffin.
Of the 2010, again, we're back to 4% like we were with the 2004. To me, this isn't giving away as much. It's a little bit tighter. It hasn't quite unfurled as much. Of course, it's younger, but it's sort of, you know, it was showing a little bit more than this about 18 months ago. A lot of Granges will go through phases. This one's starting to just sort of tighten up again.
Yeah.
And another few years before you see the colours shine once more. But the tightness on the palate is the giveaway here.
Yeah. But the thing about all the wines is just the layers and layers of complexity in there. You know, the in the older ones, the slightly tertiary, gamey, meaty characters mixed with that core of really intense fruit, and then the layers of oak, and then the freshness as well. So there's just so much complexity to the wines. It's going to try.
And it's really hard running into like coming up with the characters and that. If I were to use terms like cola or sarsaparilla, and I quite often do when we do tasting notes, you know, it's not meant to imply that this is a non-wine type of character, but it is often, you know, if you've got 6 or 10 or 20 or 30 Granges, you know, what are those distinguishing characters? And, you know, no two are the same, and they manifest so much over time. Of course, it's easier to describe them when they go through the secondary and tertiary phases. That's when you can talk about the tan leathers and the mushroom and the truffle and all those other earthy characters. But at this point, you know, there's still a lot of primary fruit there as a 10-year-old.
Absolutely. Okay.
Now that's block 42. Those vines there were planted in 1888, and that's what went into your 1953 Grange Cabernet, the 1963 Bin 64, the 1996 block 42, and the 2004 block 42. And 4% of what we had earlier in the 04 Grange comes from that vineyard, block 42 at Kalimna.
Okay. And so Nigel is asking, are there any vineyards that are organic or biodynamic?
Look, a lot of ours are organically tended, and we used to have a number of vineyards in the Clare Valley that were certified, but we're not so much into the certification anymore. We're not so much biodynamic. Some of our growers are, and look, very little intervention. Let's not forget South Australia, the driest state of the world's driest continent with a winter dominant rainfall. We do not spray that much anyway. We don't have to. The reason why we have vineyards like this from the 1880s and older is because viticulturally, this is an ideal climate. So things are literally clean and green anyway, but we're not religious about what we have to add in a difficult year. In a year like 1969 or 2011, when we had a lot of rain, we'll spray if we have to protect the best of the best of the best. So a lot of our processes are truly organic, but not without exception in a extreme year.
Yeah.
A bit like irrigation, you know, most of our vineyards at the top end, a lot of them are not irrigated, but we don't not put water on something to say it's not irrigated if the vines are going to die. What's the sense in that? Yeah. So establish vineyards with water, and then we spend a lot of the rest of the lifetime of the vine weaning it off that supplementary water. Look, the last wine, the 2012, you can see there 18 months in New Oak. You can see that it's only 2 regions in this instance. the Barossa and McLaren Vale sourced. So, you know, a very different style in this particular year. It's still so definitively Grange. This has a soft spot with many wine critics, perhaps not as highly accoladed as the 08 in this bracket, but it's everything Grange should be and that little bit more. It really is. Yeah.
And another question in the box was, did you, what was the reason for dropping the Hermitage from Grange Hermitage?
Right. Yeah. Well, look, back in the day when Max created the wine, it was Grange Shiraz, but we called Shiraz in Australia. It had many different names, one of which was Hermitage, you know, with respect and paying homage to the red of variety of the Rhone Valley. And there were many other red varieties, of course, and still are. We dropped it in some markets in 1989 and others in 1990 before we legally had to. So Hermitage came off in most markets with the 1990 Grange. So now it's just simply Grange.
Yeah.
Just like, you know, Champagne, although Penfolds, let's not forget, now with the House of Tierno does have 3 champagnes made in Champagne. But sparkling wine in Australia, we can't use the word, understandably, champagne. Port's gone. Lots of terms like that have gone. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's delicious.
Something here too, Ryan, a little bit of a scoop here. Not many people, a few people have heard of G3, but here's a preview of something that's going to be released in a few months' time. This is G4.
Okay.
And G4, would you believe, you have tasted in this session 3 of the vintages that have gone into this wine. The 2002, the 2004, and the 2008. The 4th wine that's gone into G4 is the yet to be released 2016, which comes out in August.
Right.
This is a very controversial style, as was G3, which was the 8, the 12, and at that stage, the yet to be released 14 Grange. So those 3 vintages in G3 matured as a blend and then bottled. These 4 vintages in G4, it's a blend of a blend of blends.
Right.
So, yeah, only 2,500 bottles. With G3, there were only 1,200 bottles, but I just mentioned that because those people who have joined us in this session have tasted 3 of the 4 vintages. And wouldn't it be nice to get the percentages of those vintages in this? If only I could tell you.
Well, I mean, we've just over an hour now, Peter, but maybe I can ask everyone who's watching, who's tasted the wines, write in the chat box which was their favorite. Mark Howard is saying he liked the 2006, but everybody else, I must admit, I like the 04. I thought the 04 was very good. Would you have a favorite, Peter, or can you not be that?
Look, I oscillate. Ask me today. Today it's not the 10. Usually it's the 10. My 4 is looking particularly good. And my 6, I've seen this particular, you know, it's all about the bottle, even though these are not old wines, but it's all about expectation. But I think tonight, for me, the 2004, I would like to say 2010. On paper, it'd be the 2010, but not tonight. Oh, sorry, tonight, our time.
Yeah.
Yep. But the other thing is to watch this space. You know, follow these wines and you will have favourites that go up and down and out the window over the next 20 or 30 years. There are no absolutes in wine, if only there was. But today, the 04 is my favourite. But let's ask the question another year or 2.
Yeah. Well, great, Peter. I mean, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, and it's even more of a pleasure to talk to you with 6 vintages of Grange to taste at the same time. So thank you so much for your time this evening. Lunchtime for us, this evening for you. I'm sure that you are ready to go off for your dinner now. So I will say, yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, superb presentation. People are giving lots of compliments in the chat box saying thank you very much.
Well, so, thank you. And thank you for the opportunity. And you're doing a great job with these tastings.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
Incredible. We're having a lot of fun today, and the depth, the width, the breadth of these tastings. It's incredible. apart from this one. We've scraped through, but no, an amazing job. Thank you for doing it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Peter. All right,
Goodbye
take
to you.
care. We hope to see you in London soon. Yeah.
I hope so. When, I don't know, but soon I hope.
Yeah. Good night.